Hola, bon dia a totes i tots. Benvinguts a la segona jornada del Congrés d'Arxius i Gestió Documental organitzat per l'Associació d'Arxivers de Catalunya. Abans de tot, disculpes pels problemes tècnics d'ahir i avui tenim un dia molt ple de contingut i esperem que us agradi molt. No faré molta més explicació. Us presento al nostre ponent d'avui, Tim Sherratt. És historiador i hacker i té un munt de projectes molt interessants que ara veureu enfocats al tractament del patrimoni digital. I l'hem convidat, a més de perquè té uns projectes que ara us presentarà, també és professor a la Universitat de Canberra, professor associat, ve d'Austràlia. Està fent tota una sèrie de projectes que ens poden donar una altra visió o potser ens donaran eines o una altra perspectiva de com podem fer explotació de tot el patrimoni digital. I aquest concepte tan misteriós que a tots ens sona, del concepte GLAM, que engloba una mica el tema d'arxius, museus, biblioteques. Què vol dir això? Jo crec que amb la presentació que ens farà Tim ens donarà una altra perspectiva sobre quin tractament es pot fer des d'una altra visió totalment diferent del patrimoni, perquè serveix l'estratègia que hem estat utilitzant fins ara per fer difusió i explotació de tot el patrimoni digital que s'està fent avui en dia. I sense més, us passo amb el Tim. Tim, you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from Tasmania, which is down the very bottom of Australia, so a long, long way away. Now we'll just get my screen happening here. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak today. I'm talking about something that I'm very passionate about. So I always welcome the opportunity to try and talk to people about what I'm trying to do with this thing called the GLAM Workbench. You should have seen that there should be a link to my slides for today in the chat of Zoom. So feel free to follow along. These slides will stay open and they're public, so you can share them if you want. You can go back to them after today. So obviously they have a lot of links to the things that I'll be talking about if you want to go back to them. I also just included a little link there to the rough notes of my talk today. It's not a complete transcript, but I thought it may be useful just in terms of translation and you know, if you just have some difficulty with my Australian accent. Yes, feel free to have a look at that as well. Okay. So the GLAM Workbench is really my attempt to grapple with some of the challenges of collections as data. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that phrase. What I mean when I talk about collections as data are the sorts of opportunities that arise when we move beyond the web interface as our primary means of exploring digital collections and instead start to directly manipulate the data underneath those interfaces. Let's have an example. Okay, so we're all familiar with searching collections, obviously. We go somewhere like Trove. Now, Trove, for those of you who haven't met it, is a service provided by the National Library of Australia. Trove aggregates collections in the same way or a similar way to Europeana. It also provides access to a very large collection of digitized newspapers. So there's currently about 200 million digitized newspaper articles available through Trove and is heavily used by researchers. So we go somewhere like Trove, obviously, and we type things into the search box. We get back some search results. We browse through the search results. clicking on the ones that look interesting. And gradually we assemble a list of sources that seem most relevant to our interests. But my question is, what about the other 3 million? I mean, how do we make sense of the fact that when we do a search like this, we get 3 million results? You know, digital collections raise questions of scale and meaning that we're still trying to grapple with. We're still trying to get our heads around them, to understand them. Okay, here's the same search in a different view. So what we're seeing here, instead of just the first 20 results that we might see on a typical web interface, we're seeing everything, every result, all 3 million. And it's available here as showing the number of matching results per year across the whole collection of newspaper articles. Now, seeing the search data presented in this sort of way means that we can start to formulate different types of questions. I mean, the search, if you didn't notice, was for the word radio. And we can see here, obviously, that radio, mentions of radio started to take off in the 1920s, which is when, obviously, radio, the technology was introduced. Public radio stations was introduced to Australia. So we can start to formulate questions about shifts in language, for example, the words that are used, the impact of particular technologies or historical events, and we can start to view them through the search data. We can also start to compare results in a way that's not possible through the normal web interface. So here we're seeing that search for radio again, but we're also seeing searches for telegraph and wireless. And so we're seeing that sort of the overlap of the different technologies there in the early decades of the 20th century. And it's this opening up of possibilities, the enlargement of our scope for formulating questions and pursuing different sorts of ideas, which makes the whole concept of collections as data, I think, so exciting and important. It offers new ways of seeing the collections of libraries, archives, and museums, ways of seeing that aren't constrained by our carefully designed web interfaces or narrowly glimpsed through that little narrow search box. Now, of course, this example that I've shown you is possible because Trove makes its data available through an API, an application programming interface. If you don't know what an API is, an API provides data in a form that computers can understand. So we access Trove through the web interface. Computer scripts could access that same data through an API and manipulate it, do different things with it. So to support new types of research, GLAM organizations are making more and more of their data available, you know, through APIs, but not just APIs, through data dumps, by sharing CSV files, by making available text and image collections for download, and other sorts of ways as well. And this is fabulous. It's fabulous to have this data becoming available. But once you've created your API or shared your CSV file, then what? There's still a gap between the data, which you've invested precious resources in documenting and sharing, and its use by researchers. Now, we might think that that gap can be filled by better documentation of the GLAM collection data, and by better digital skills for researchers. And certainly these things can help. They're important. And they can help answer the sort of how questions that you might have. How can I query this API? How can I calculate the frequencies of words in this piece of text? But what's still missing, I think, are answers to the why questions. why would a researcher be interested in your collections? Why would a researcher invest the time needed to understand what's in your CSV file, or to learn the idiosyncrasies of your API? And I'm hoping that the GLAM Workbench can help to fill that gap, to answer some of those why questions. So the GLAM Workbench, or tools like this, can offer more than just descriptions of how to use the data, but also glimpses of the possibilities that might emerge from the data. You know, those moments of excitement that we have when you can see that you can see your research questions from a totally different perspective. The GLAM Workbench, and there it is, I hope you'll have an explore of it, provides a wide range of entry points into digital collections of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. Now, it is mostly focused on Australia and New Zealand at the moment, but there are some examples that have broader applicability, as we'll see shortly. Now, these entry points into the collections take many different forms. There are self-contained tools and apps. There's also more detailed tutorials. There's little examples of working code. And there are also what I suppose you would call just quick hacks or workarounds, solutions to particular problems working with collection data. And this diversity is quite deliberate. It takes time to develop digital skills and confidence, and people are going to be arriving at the GLAM Workbench at different points along this journey. So someone who really hasn't worked with digital collection data before could fire up one of the apps. They could get out something useful from it, and hopefully that would start to help them appreciate the broader possibilities. Someone who wants to understand the technology behind an app might work through a tutorial which explains how the underlying data is structured and queried. And somebody who does have some coding skills might just drop in for a snippet of code that helps them make use of a collection API. The GLAM Workbench is also live. So all of the examples in the GLAM Workbench can be run live in the cloud or a variety of other environments. And the aim of this is to encourage experimentation. So you're not just reading about what's possible with collection data, you can actually just try it now, straight away. The GLAM Workbench is also meant to be edited, reused, hacked itself. All the code is accessible and openly licensed. It's not a complete guide to collections as data. It's a starting point that I hope people will build on. It's meant to encourage your own explorations. The GLAM Workbench is not a sort of teach yourself programming site. Although, by working through the examples, you'll gain an understanding of what's possible with code, and you'll gradually become familiar with some, particular patterns in the code. You'll also gain some confidence because through the GLAM Workbench, you'll be encouraged to edit bits of the code to see what happens. And so that helps build up your confidence. And the GLAM Workbench, of course, is not finished or perfect. I mean, it's something that I'm continuing to add to without any particular endpoint in mind. So I'm really trying to address these sorts of questions. As I've said, making people aware of possibilities, answering that question of why should I be interested? Providing a range of starting points, answering that question of what can you give me an example that I can use? And developing a range of different pathways. That question of where do I go next? These are the sort of themes which underlie my thinking with the GLAM Workbench. Now, the technology which the GLAM Workbench makes use of are a thing called Jupyter Notebooks. Now, if you haven't met Jupyter Notebooks before, they're this is sort of what they look like. You'll see Jupyter Notebooks combine bits of code with the outputs of that code and some commentary, some discussion, as well as images. And they combine all those into a form that you can actually just view through your web browser. And you can actually run those code cells in your web browser. It all just happens in your web browser. So you can see by combining that sort of narrative with code, the Jupyter Notebook can step you through what's involved in getting and working with data. So Jupyter Notebooks puts that sort of exploratory computing in your browser. As I said, it provides a computational narrative, combining text and images and code and a lot more. And what I think is most interesting is the way that Jupyter Notebooks can blur the line between tutorial and tool. I mean, you can actually be doing something which has a useful output, can be accessing some data, analyzing some data within a Jupyter Notebook while you're actually learning about it. So you're not going off, doing the tutorial, reading up the API documentation, and then coming back and trying to do something. You dive in straight away and do useful things while you're learning about how it all works. And a range of GLAM organizations are now making use of Jupyter Notebooks to help document their collections and the possibilities. And there's a few there, and there's more all the time. The Victoria and Albert Museum just recently released a whole suite of Jupyter Notebooks to help with the documentation of their new API, or the new version of their API. And they're a fabulous example of what's possible. Now, we're going to have a look at some examples. And as we do that, we'll see that the Jupyter Notebooks themselves can take different forms by using different extensions to the main Jupyter technologies. You can view them as apps. You can view them in the traditional notebook form. So it really means you can tailor the notebooks to a range of different audiences. So we can use, within the GLAM Workbench, we can use the Jupyter Notebooks to help us find GLAM data. To start with. So, for example, I've talked about Trove's digitized newspapers, 200 million digitized newspaper articles. The Trove Newspaper Harvester is a tool which enables you to download both the metadata and the full text of a search within those newspapers. So you can actually grab all of the OCR text of those articles, save them into your own data set, which you can then use with, say a text analysis tool, for example, to explore the language in those newspaper articles. You can also use it to download images of the articles as well. So you're getting it in bulk. And this is actually more, again, than you can get through the web interface. The web interface will only ever allow you to look at the first 2,000 articles. With this newspaper harvester, you could download hundreds and thousands of articles. So indeed, this example here is one where I harvested about 500,000 newspaper articles, which included the word immigrants. So I then took the text of those 500,000 newspaper articles, found the word that appeared in the text before the word immigrants, and then sort of grouped them by origin to create this little visualization, which shows the sort of origins of the immigrants that were being talked about in newspapers across Australian history. But not every collection has an API. The National Archives of Australia has an online database called Record Search, which has fabulous, rich data, but it doesn't have an API. So I have a series of what are called screen scrapers. So they're little computer scripts which actually extract structured data from the web pages. They're a sort of stopgap measure, and they are quite fragile, because if the web page changes, then your screen scraper doesn't work anymore. But sometimes, it's your only alternative. So you can get large amounts of data out of Record Search. Nice structured data. You can also download images of any digitized files as well. And a little example here. I recently downloaded all the publicly available files from our Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, which is our sort of domestic spying organisation. And they have made a large collection of surveillance files of Australians, particularly in the 1950s. And some of those have been made publicly available. So I downloaded all of the ones that were publicly available, about 200,000 images of digitized files. And I did some, I used a neural net to identify redactions within those files, and ended up with a collection of about 400,000 redactions. And you can see a nice assortment of redactions there. And I've used them in various other projects. And there's a link to a video down here, which you can look at if you want to find out what I was doing with redactions. You can also download images. So Trove, as well as its newspapers, are digitizing a lot of journals and magazines. They're in a different sort of section, so they're not delivered like the newspapers. But they have nice large scans of individual pages, but you can't get them through the API. So you have to do, again, a little bit of fiddling around to get that data out. So there's some examples of that, again, in the GLAM Workbench. And the GLAM Workbench also includes a number of pre-harvested data sets. So rather than expect everybody to do sort of undertake large harvesting tasks, where I know there's material of interest, I've created a data set that people can just download and use. So in this case, the Bulletin was a magazine which ran from the 1880s through to the 1980s for 100 years. In the early decades, at least, it was a very racist magazine. We had this thing in Australia called the White Australia policy. And the Bulletin was very much a supporter of the White Australia policy, as you can see by some of those cartoons there. But these full-page editorial cartoons, there was one in every issue. They're a really sort of significant reflection of the sort of thinking of the time. And they're very widely used in publications and teaching and things. So I figured out a way of extracting these from the digitized journals, and I made a collection of them. So within the GLAM Workbench, there's both the Jupyter Notebook, which shows you how to harvest these images, and there's also the collection of images themselves. And also, you know, just going back to that thing of sort of meeting people where they are with their digital skills in the GLAM Workbench, providing a sort of a variety of pathways. I knew that one place where these sorts of images would be heavily used would be by secondary teachers in secondary schools, for example. So, and they're not going to look through a collection of, you know, several thousand images. So I packaged them up into a series of PDFs, one per decade, which they can just download and browse through. So same data, just presented in a different way to meet the needs of different audiences. So another sort of emphasis of the GLAM Workbench is this one, which I start with, the ability to ask different questions. This are the sort of examples I started with of looking at, of visualizing a search in the newspapers over time. And we can, these are making use of the search facets which are available from Trove, either by year or by other things. So this chart here is by illustration type of newspaper articles. And we can actually see the rise of the photograph in Australian newspapers, that green line there. And as I said, I mean, these provide real opportunities for exploring change over time in things like language and technologies. And I also want to point out here that this is a sort of Jupyter Notebook showing the code and the results and everything. This is also a Jupyter Notebook, but it's a Jupyter Notebook running as an app. So you don't see any of the code. You actually just see the little buttons and the widgets. So you just put in your query, you press the button and it generates the charts. So the code underneath is basically the same, but it's just being presented in a different form. Again, trying to meet the needs of different audiences and users. This is from New Zealand. So Digital New Zealand, again, is an aggregator like Europeana. And I thought I would try and do a sort of picture of all of their collections. And so what I did here was to try and look at the usage rights of items within the different collections that they aggregate to see where the open collections were. So the collections up the top here are the ones which are most open. The size is the sort of number of items. And I tried to make them look like fireworks because I thought, you know, let's celebrate open collections. So the ones at the top here are big exploding fireworks of open collections. But the notebook to generate that chart is again within the GLAM Workbench, as well as how you get out that data about usage information. Hansard is the record of the word that's spoken within the Australian Parliament. And it's all available through a database online. But and it's really underneath. It's really well structured XML file. So nice structure there. But the database itself is not very easy to use, and it's very hard to get out that XML files in aggregate form that you can actually do analysis of. So I've actually, again, created a data set which has harvested all of those XML files. It's all available on GitHub. And in the GLAM Workbench, there's, as well as, again, the notebook to show you how to harvest that data, there's some examples of the sorts of things you can do with it. There is in the GLAM Workbench a web archive section, which does use a number of web archives collections. So as well as the National Library of Australia, there's the National Library of New Zealand, there's the Internet Archive and the UK Web Archive. And in fact, the code in the notebooks could be adapted to work with a range of other web archives because they use very similar technologies. This is just one example of looking at change over time by generating a series of full page screenshots from a particular web page. You know, web archives can, you know, are obviously really important in terms of, you know, the history of everything since the 1990s. And they're going to be an important record for historians, but they can be quite intimidating to use. So again, the GLAM Workbench is providing a series of entry points which enable people to start to answer some questions without having to download terabytes of data. So you can get in there and start to ask some questions. So another example is this notebook. Again, runs as an app. And what this notebook does is it lets you look through, examine the history of a web page to see when a particular piece of text first appears or when it disappears. So you can sort of look to see when particular words first occur within a web page. As well as sort of, you know, using collections, I suppose, the way they were planned to be used, you know, there are ways of sort of, I suppose, subverting the aims and hacking around some of the difficulties or the blockages. I mean, I actually think it's really important or really useful for collections to have a way for people to have a way of randomly accessing collection items. Because it aids in a sense of play and serendipitous discovery. But not many collections actually provide it. But there are ways of sort of hacking around an API to generate random items. So that's an example from the Digital New Zealand collection, again, of how you can get a random item out of Digital New Zealand. Trove has quite a large collection of non-English language newspapers amongst the rest, but they're not easy to find within the Trove interface. And of course, if you just start searching keywords, you're not necessarily going to find them because they might be in a different language or a completely different script in the case of the Chinese newspapers. So what I did was I created a notebook which actually samples articles from the newspaper, all of the newspapers, and uses a language detection library to find non-English content within those newspapers. So that enabled me to generate a list of non-English language newspapers in Trove. So again, there's the notebook which shows you how I did this, but there's also just a list of the titles which you can access to help you navigate through Trove. And you can also, the GLAM Workbench also offers some possibilities for creativity. So this example is another hack, I suppose, because I discovered that within the HTML pages that present the newspaper articles in Trove are embedded the coordinates in the page image of individual words. So I can actually pull out those coordinates, and that enabled me to crop out images of particular words. So I've created a notebook where you can just type in words. It will go and find an example of that word. It will present you with an image, and you can continue doing that to build up a message. So these are messages which I created using one of the notebooks in the GLAM Workbench. So again, you can be a bit creative, have a bit of fun with collections as well. I'm a big believer in play and fun when it comes to digital collections as ways of helping you understand what's there. We can also use Jupyter Notebooks to help us develop documentation, which not only sort of tells users what they can do, it shows them, it gives them live examples. So again, another random item example. In this case, the Museum of Victoria does have a random sort option on its API. So I thought I should highlight it. And show how how little code you actually needed to generate something like this. That's all the code that's needed to generate this little random item viewer in the notebook. The National Museum of Australia has an API which has really rich records. So I basically explored the API and sort of documented what I was doing as I explored it to help people understand how that data is actually structured, and particularly looking at the temporal data and the spatial data that's available through the API. And again, on web archives. So most web archives there's a small set of technology that most web archives use, and they generally conform to the Memento protocol, which is a way of getting particular captures out of web archives. So a capture of a web page near a particular date is a memento. A list of captures of a particular page is a time map. So I documented these sorts of things across the web archives that I was working with, showing both how the sort of Memento protocol worked, but also the fact that there were some variations between how it was implemented in these different services. So again, it documents how you access the data and also gives you some live examples and some workarounds where there are some of those bumps. Okay, so as hopefully you've seen, the GLAM Workbench is trying to provide a range of pathways for users to build their confidence as they start to work on with these sorts of data sources. So there's a getting started notebook, which actually walks through the basic processes of how a Jupyter notebook works. Really all you need to know is how to press Shift Enter, because Shift Enter runs a code cell in a Jupyter notebook. And if you can do that, then you can make a Jupyter notebook work. And it actually, again, uses live data. So it's using the National Museum of Australia API. So not only are you learning how a Jupyter notebook works, but you're actually starting to query a live GLAM data source. And as we've seen, a number of the resources in the GLAM Workbench are available either as apps or as notebooks. So you have, again, those different entry points. And some actually have both. So there is an app version and there's a notebook version. So you can come in as a sort of a user who just wants to get some information out, not particularly interested in how it works, can use the app, get the information. But then if they start to get curious, they can go into the notebook and they can see how everything works, and they can start to change things and become aware of those sort of possibilities. Now, as I said, GLAM Workbench is live. You can run these notebooks live in the cloud, and this is largely due to a particular service called Binder. And you'll see as you go through the GLAM Workbench that you'll have these links which say run live in Binder. And if you click on that link, what happens is that it goes off to the Binder service. It tells the Binder service the requirements that are needed to run the notebook. So all the software that needs to be installed for the notebooks to run. Binder creates a computing environment. It sets up a computer in the cloud just for you, which has all the software that you need in order to run those notebooks. That means that, so it's basically one click. You click on the link in the GLAM Workbench, it opens up the notebooks running live in the cloud. You can start to do things. Once again, you know, it's great for experimentation and exploration. You don't have to spend time setting up your computer so you can do things. Click on a link, bam, you're in there, you're working. Click and go. And in the context of the GLAM Workbench, Binder is really critical because it does encourage that sort of exploration. It brings down those sort of barriers that might prevent people from actually having a go and trying and see what happens. You know, and I think going back to the Workbench's aims to expose the possibilities, to make that why visible, being able to do real work in a learning environment is really important. So that one click and you're there is really important. But there are limits to Binder. If you go away, leave your Binder session for 10 minutes or so, it will stop. The data isn't saved between sessions, so you need to download any data that you harvest, for example. And so these sorts of things, you know, if you want to move beyond the sort of exploration phase, what do you do? And I've been spending a lot of time recently addressing these questions. So I've created a whole series of other ways of running the Jupyter notebooks. This one making use of Reclaim Cloud, which is a paid hosting service, but it's aiming to support digital scholarship and you can manage the costs quite effectively. But, and they've also set up their system in a way that I can create a button, which I insert into the GLAM Workbench. Users can click on that button and it will install the environment within Reclaim Cloud. So one click again, and you've basically got a working environment where you can use these notebooks. So that for me is the next stage on from Binder. So the user who wants to, you know, harvest a lot of newspaper articles or something like that, they can set up their own Reclaim Cloud environment and they can go back to that anytime. It's persistent, so all their data will be saved. So it's a sort of next step in their experience of the GLAM Workbench. But if you'd prefer to run things locally, I'm also starting to generate Docker images of all the repositories in the GLAM Workbench. So that, again, is a container that contains all the software that you need. So you can just run that on your local computer. All these things, the Reclaim Cloud and the Docker, I should say, are sort of works in progress. So I haven't rolled it out across all of the GLAM Workbench repositories yet. There's between 30 and 40 different repositories in the GLAM Workbench. I've only actually done it fully in a couple so far, but this is my aim over the next few months to roll this out. And finally, just coming back to the point that the GLAM Workbench is open. It's meant to be changed. It's meant to be used. It's meant to be copied. So please go in, have an explore. Feel free to take anything, to reuse it, to change it, to try it out with your own data. And let me know if you do. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation that make us think about how we have a lot of data in our archives and digital collections and how people and researchers are going to use it. And there is a lot of tools to access to it. And we have to change our perspective because people want to use it and access in another way. And it was very useful, your presentation. And we have a lot of questions from people. And I'm going to make you some questions. One is about the concept of data dump. They ask us if you can give us an example because the person who asked this question is not sure about understand if a data dump is a container of data, if you are talking about the databases or encapsulate data sets.
Yeah, well, it could be anything really. I mean, I just use that as a sort of catch-all phrase, I suppose. in that, yes, it could be like the output of a database. It could be, self-contained SQLite database, but it could be just, a whole lot of XML or text or something like that. So yes, it's really, I suppose, just in terms of a dump, it's just what's coming out of your systems, I suppose, is what I'm thinking about, and just ways of sharing that.
Yeah. So we have another question. People are very worried about the digital world, about our skills to make it real. So they ask if we need training in coding to be able to understand how to use these tools and
Yep.
view.
So yeah. Look, in terms of using what's in the GLAM Workbench or using Jupyter notebooks, to begin with, no, you don't need to know how to code. And that's one of the benefits of them, really, is that, I mean, literally, as I said, you need to know how to press Shift and Enter on your keyboard. And that runs a code cell in the Jupyter notebook, and you can see the output. But it is a learning environment. So obviously you can do that. You can run a bit of code. You can see what happens. And of course, the next step from there is to modify that bit of code in some way. And it may be just, changing the keyword that's sent off to the API or something like that, or the number of results that are displayed, but when you're starting to make those modifications, obviously you are starting to code. You are modifying the code. And I say to people that, once you sort of work through a lot of these examples, you will, even if you're not sort of thinking that you're learning to code, you will start to see some of the patterns that are always occurring in terms of, the sort of basic programming things of loops and, having variables and those sorts of things. But really, the main thing with the GLAM Workbench is or GLAM or Jupyter notebooks in general, that's why GLAM organizations are making use of them, is that they do provide a sort of a low barrier to entry for people who want to start working with data. So they're not expecting you to have gone away and done a Python programming course before you can use the Jupyter notebook. The idea is that you get into the Jupyter notebook, you can start to see what's possible. That may then motivate you that you want to go and learn more about Python programming or something. But it's that getting you in. And it's the same for people within GLAM organizations, I think, just to start, get an understanding of the possibilities, the things that people might start to do with your collection data, that again, the Jupyter notebooks can provide a useful starting point for those. Obviously, if you're going to develop Jupyter notebooks, then you do need to have some coding skills. You need to be able to program, because obviously you're creating the code that goes in them. But in terms of that sort of exploration and experimentation, no, you can just get in and start using them.
Okay. Some people also have questions about or ideas of put these tools and guidelines to users in our websites for people to understand how to use it. And it's very interesting. And they are also asking about how these connect with other professions like journalists, or how to make this more global, and which are our allies to work with that, because it's not only for archives, and we have a lot of allies to work with it. Who do you think we have to start to work outside our world of archives?
Well, I mean, sort of one of the interesting things about, I suppose, Jupyter, the technology, is obviously it's come out of the data science world. So there's lots of people who are interested in working with different types of data at the moment. And obviously, people who are researching machine learning or AI are looking for new types of data sets, which they can test and work with. So there's certainly a sort of appetite for data beyond researchers at the moment. those sorts of people. And you mentioned journalists. Obviously, that data journalism is a new thing which has emerged over recent years, where you see, the sort of visualizations embedded within, within articles. So I think, I think we don't. I think that, as I said, this sort of appetite for data, and if we can get it out there, we can start to develop these sorts of new relationships, and ones which we might not expect. People who we might not think would have any sort of interest in our own collections, by making that available in a consumable form, and supplementing it with Jupyter notebooks or documentation, which again enables them to see why they might be interested in that. I think, it does open up all sorts of opportunities for new relationships with a range of different users.
Okay, we have to finish the session. It's a pity because people have a lot of questions about it, because we have a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of data to share with people and to give them to use it, and we have to think about and start to work with tools and technology, and don't be afraid of it. And your project and your presentation is very interesting to open our minds about it. So thank you very much, Tim, for be here and explain your work to us. Thank you.
Thanks again. And yes, if you've got any questions, you've seen my Twitter handle, Rag on Twitter. There's also links in the slide to a sort of discussion board. So feel free to get in touch if you'd like to discuss any of these things further.
Thank you very much. Us esperem a les següents sessions. Sabeu que ara hi ha 2 sessions en paral·lel. Ens veiem. Fins ara.
Ajudem a la ciutadania i les empreses quan fem una bona administració. Administració 24/7, que estem els 365 dies de l'any a l'abast de la ciutadania per ficar aquesta bona administració, aquesta administració immediata, àgil, eficaç i propera al servei de la ciutadania de Lleida.
És cíclic de la nostra relació amb l'Ajuntament de Lleida. Bàsicament, pretenem acompanyar l'Ajuntament amb el que és l'impuls que estan donant a l'administració electrònica. No és un tema menor, estem parlant de 600 usuaris, més de 600 usuaris, i l'any passat, el 2020, més de 200.000 documents, amb el qual ja posa a prova el sistema i això ens va molt bé.
L'administració electrònica considero que ens ha fet que siguem molt més eficients de cara a la ciutadania. La ciutadania no ens ha de portar documents. La ciutadania, si ens porta algun document, el digitalitzem d'una manera segura, el registrem i li retornem. La ciutadania no cal que vingui a fer gestions aquí, les poden fer per internet. És a dir, és uns beneficis a nivell global, ja no sol de departaments, sinó a nivell d'administracions i, com he dit, sobretot de ciutadania.
La millora de l'atenció a la ciutadania està en l'escurçament dels terminis. La ciutadania, el que vols és que l'administració sigui àgil, i contesti, i tu puguis realitzar el tràmit que ja has iniciat.
Cal entendre, i això és necessari en qualsevol procés de canvi, que l'Ajuntament de Lleida ha posat un lideratge tant polític com organitzatiu com tècnic molt important al llarg de l'últim any i mig, sobretot, i això té les seves conseqüències. És a dir, és molt difícil impulsar el canvi en l'administració local si no hi ha un lideratge tant polític, sobretot, com tècnic com organitzatiu.
Els reptes i objectius en aquesta administració ha estat tenir la màxima tecnologia, una tecnologia puntera, una tecnologia seguritzada, una tecnologia que estigués al servei també de tots els requeriments de l'ENS, de tots els requeriments normatius, però a la vegada mirada des d'una visió ciutadana, des d'allò que realment l'usuari necessita, que sigui usable, que sigui ràpida, que sigui intuïtiva, i hem intentat en aquest repte de la digitalització tenir els 2 requeriments.
El procés d'implementació del projecte el vam iniciar sobre l'any 2017. Vam començar amb els primers pilots a finals de l'any 2017, principis del 2018. Els primers procediments que vam posar en marxa van ser aquells que ja estaven treballant i tenien versió en electrònic. Llavors ens vam centrar en una primera fase amb integrar els serveis cap a la ciutadania.
La implantació ha estat gradual gràcies a que les nostres eines són modulars, en l'anomenem suite. Tenim la suite de CityClick, que està composada de diferents mòduls que donen diferents funcionalitats. Llavors això ha permès anar fent una gestió del canvi molt gradual, tant pel que fa als usuaris com a la utilització de l'eina.
Para una gestión sencilla, ágil y eficaz de los expedientes en la administración pública local, es necesario que las soluciones con las que trabaja la entidad estén adaptadas a los requisitos legales y funcionales, y estas soluciones interoperen con otras aplicaciones existentes en la entidad y con las plataformas de la Administración General del Estado. La suite de productos de administración electrónica de Berger-Lebro te ayuda en esta labor. Las soluciones de administración electrónica, sede, registro y gestor de expedientes y otras soluciones de back office se conectan con las diferentes plataformas estatales en función del estado de tramitación del expediente. Para conectar nuestras aplicaciones con las plataformas de la AGE es imprescindible definir los códigos del sistema de información administrativa de los procedimientos con los que queremos interoperar. A partir del momento en que se inicia el procedimiento administrativo desde la Oficina de Atención al Ciudadano o desde la sede electrónica, se puede interoperar con las plataformas Clave, Apodera, Habilita, SIR y la plataforma de intermediación de datos. En el registro presencial, el funcionario recabará la documentación en papel del ciudadano y se validará contra la plataforma Habilita. Después efectuará las copias electrónicas auténticas de esos documentos, devolviendo los originales al ciudadano. La solicitud podrá generarse desde el propio registro para que el ciudadano la firme biométricamente, permitiendo una administración plenamente electrónica. La representación entre administrados se validará automáticamente contra la plataforma Apodera, tanto desde la sede electrónica como desde el registro, y se guardará la evidencia de la existencia del poder en el expediente electrónico. Durante la tramitación del expediente, el usuario podrá interoperar con la plataforma de intermediación de datos. En ella puede descargar y consultar la documentación producida por cualquier administración pública y que el ciudadano no esté obligado a presentar. Para permitir la expedición de copias auténticas, la plataforma validará la existencia del usuario en Habilita. El Hub de Notificaciones BL Notifica actúa como receptor de notificaciones generadas desde el gestor de expedientes, el registro de salidas u otras aplicaciones, sean de Vergelebro o no. El objetivo es remitirlas a las diferentes plataformas de notificaciones como Notifica o la sede electrónica. El acuse de recibo de la notificación quedará vinculado a los documentos notificados y al expediente que los contiene de forma totalmente automática. De este modo, la entidad no solo gestionará los expedientes de modo ágil y eficaz, sino que podrá acceder e interoperar con las plataformas que ofrece la AGE para realizar comprobaciones, gestiones y tareas, cerrando el ciclo completo de modo integral, fiable y seguro. Todo ello de acuerdo al Esquema Nacional de Seguridad y al Esquema Nacional de Interoperabilidad. Conecta con las plataformas estatales. Simplifica la gestión administrativa de tus expedientes. Ahorra tiempo y mejora el control de los expedientes de tu entidad con Vergelebro.